All right. Thank you, and thank you for participating as I stalled to get us to the time. But again, thank you all for being here. Really, really excited about the talks that we're gonna to share today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our MC for the day one pre-break sessions, Ash Hine.
Hi everyone. Super excited for day one of BioTAP. Also, Caleb, I'm realizing I know you played us the sound yesterday when it runs out, but I'm realizing now it's like the Oscars music when they want you to get off the stage, which is great. So it's an honor to be able to introduce our 2024 BioTAP conference keynote speaker, Dr. Sahoya Cotner, who's a professor at the University of Bergen, Norway. She earned her PhD in conservation biology at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, and she is a professor in biological sciences at the University of Bergen, or UIB, in Bergen, Norway, and an adjunct professor in the Department of Biology Teaching and Learning at the University of Minnesota. She collaborates on several projects that focus on inclusive, evidence-based STEM higher education, and she is also the editor-in-chief for the Nordic Journal of STEM Education. And Caleb added in, she was a cohort 3 BioTAP scholar. So with that, I will give Sahoya the floor.
Thank you so much. And here's where we hope that the screen share works. And I think it's going to. I think this is good. So thumbs up, you can see this screen. I'm going into slideshow mode. Yeah, okay. So this is really broad, and obviously I'm just going to funnel this. I'm really happy to be here. I know my screen is blurred, but it is nighttime. And one of the things that I want to say is I had a great experience and I'm really excited about the project that I did as in cohort 3, which is now a very strong part of my identity. And I'm going to talk about it. Um, and also I want to say an apology because I like this conference. I've been in the past and attended. I am currently, it is nighttime here, but I'm also hosting a seminar speaker here. And that seminar speaker is staying in my house. And that seminar speaker is somebody that many of you know, who is Sissy Ballin, who's on a research stay in Germany. So I'm sorry that I won't be seeing more of the talks, but I hope to catch some over the next 2 days. So way to go. I have an agenda, which is that I want to just say really briefly what we all already know. Why do we focus on our teaching assistants? And then launch into what do we know about their role? And use this like as a 3 case study story. And I say 3 case studies. Let's just see how the time goes. I have it built in as 3 different studies. And for each one of those, I'm going to ask you after, what are the take home messages in your mind for TAPD, right? For our teaching assistant professional development. Um, so let's just launch right in. Why do we focus on teaching assistants? I feel it's important just to remind ourselves that there is something special about this near peer mentoring role. We know that. We know that in many cases, there might be age similarities. And the older I get, the more I realize that even a 10-year gap is going to be a closer similarity in age than anything that I can provide for them. They're more likely, and this is a really big thing, they are more likely to reflect, our TAs, the student population than the professors do. And there's been a lot of work about how the professor population often does not reflect the student population. Our TAs are going to get a lot closer to that. They may have actually taken the focal course. I mean, I don't think I've taught a course in higher ed that I actually took as an undergrad. So, I mean, maybe that says more about me that's bad, but the fact is that these TAs may have actually taken it and have experience. And they may be seen as less authoritative, which can be good and bad, but in the sense of invoking stress, it could be good, right? They might be more open to sharing concerns about the course, right? But we also know they have closer contact with individual students in many cases. It can depend on the course, and they may have more face time with the students. So I took a course that I used to teach when I was at the University of Minnesota, and I still maintain a project there and some affiliations there. So, but this course, I would have a section that had a 1 to 125 instructor to student ratio. And we would meet 150 minutes a week. And then the students would go and they'd have labs. This is a very typical setup for us. And they would meet with their TA in a 1 to 25, more or less, ratio, 120 minutes per week. The math doesn't hold up. There's a lot of different things happening in these classrooms, but still, I can use this mental exercise to say, okay, that's an average of 1.2 minutes of FaceTime per student per week versus 4.8 minutes with a TA. And it at least makes the case of their potential for greater FaceTime, right? And also proximity. Okay. However, and Caleb, you've already alluded to this, and we all were brought to this realization together. Let me remove the offending cat. Teaching assistants may be teaching for the first time, getting limited training, and the training might be limited to that provided by their instructor. And if it's us in this room, that's great. They're lucky, right? Because we've thought about this and we've thought about it from the standpoint of professional development. But that might not be the case with many of our TAs. And what happens is there's a real heavy emphasis on content. And so the question is that like the course content, the biology course? And we want our TAs to be familiar with the content, but is that what is most needed in a lot of those training scenarios? I know the answer is probably not, but what should we focus on with our TA training, if not course content? Okay. And this is what I'd like you to think about and give me some ideas in the chat. If not course content, and I can tell you, okay, Adam, thank you for being brave and starting this. Oh my God, it's so fast. It's so fast. This is great. Yes, word choice. Yes, inclusive teaching, classroom management. I know that you know this also based on who's presenting and what you're presenting in this meeting. Okay, Sarah, I'm going to close my chat now that I've seen that. Oh, then there's all this other stuff. Pedagogical growth mindset, pedagogical. This is great. Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to ask you 3 more questions in the chat, but that's the first one. I know that we know this also, again, that content's rarely the problem. Our course instructors are typically really comfortable talking about the content that they're obsessed with. And you all said things that kind of align with this, especially mindset. I noticed came out. I think somebody said cultural relevance, but I may have been making that up. And when I look at the talks that are coming up the next 2 days, this isn't content, right? You're looking at culturally responsive teaching, equity, confidence, autonomy, self-efficacy, right? These are things that are all really important and that we can help our TAs, with as they're trying to work on that with their students. And so that's where I want to look at a few different studies. And the first study is we're going to go way back in time. Here's the wavy lines for going back in time. And I'm saying that also because the language of this study is not up to date, right? And you probably get this sense it was published in 2011. I'm using gender. We had TAs choose between 2 options that they could do, and I think maybe the choices were male and female. So there's some language issues that are not up to date, but I still want to share this study with you. And as you can see, this is a study that I did with Sissy Ballin, who many of you know, when she was a tiny baby undergraduate student. What we were interested in actually was about student confidence, and really it was self-efficacy I realized, is their confidence in their ability to do very specific tasks. And we asked them in the beginning about their confidence, like, can you interpret charts and graphs? Do you feel comfortable communicating the science of this course to your peers? Just kind of some standard items that have been used in a lot of studies. We asked at the beginning and the end of the semester. And I'm going to break those down. They also form a nice construct, but I'm going to break them down for dramatic purposes. And we looked at differences between men and women in the course. And probably at least the general vibe when they started. But I want to show you that prior to the course, and we say pre-test, it's really a pre-survey. We asked students, to rate on a 5-point scale their confidence in their ability to do certain things. And we note with these asterisks, so again, it's a 5-point scale, and we're seeing differences. Let me back up. These are what I'm representing for you is the difference in the average male response and the average female response to each respective item. Okay. So for instance, in the first one on the pretest, we are seeing that men were more confident than women on average, 0.57 points out of 5 possible points. Okay, so these were significant differences. We saw in the post test that a lot of those confidence things went away, and I would like to think it's because, we were just amazing teachers. But the deal was there was a lot of variability. And so not, for instance, all women gained confidence in this course. And so we actually wanted to get into what's happening here. And we hypothesized, right, that instructor gender might matter. Okay. And we were really assigning sex to them. This was 2011. And we had different instructors, we had different teaching assistants, and then we had different students. And we're using a binary. And then, so what we did was we took all this information and we partitioned it based on whether or not, basically based on what your gender that you're reporting, that of your TA, and that of your instructor. So you'll see, for instance, a column that's labeled 000, and that means this is the average gains in confidence over a semester for women students with women TAs and women instructors. Okay. And then a 111 would be, male, male, female. Okay. So here is the table. Before I pull back the curtain, I just want to make sure we know what we're looking at. You can see the columns where we've partitioned these differences. You can see all the different items we asked about. And we're also going to be looking at change based on possible change to control for a ceiling effect. So it's percent change over time based on the possible change over time. We take that away and let's zoom in on this first column, right? Women in classes taught by women TAs and women instructors. And we can see that they're making confidence gains between like 33% and 46%, right? Of the possible gains they could have made. These were significant. We can continue moving across and we can see that women in classes with a woman as a professor or in a male TA or vice versa made some significant gains as well. Women in classes with male TAs and male instructors did not make significant gains, right, in these pairwise comparisons. Okay, so that is interesting. And I think we can look at all the columns. There's an interesting column a little bit over to the right, and I think you can see my wiggling arrow that evolutionary biologists might have fun with, but there's things going on, but I want to draw your attention to those involving women students and their variable gains. And ask the question, Well, first, point out that having a female teaching assistant is associated with greater confidence gains. So we'll bring this back to BioTAP and TA professional development. But then that's the next question is, God, my timing is off because I want to say also that this echoes more recent finding or predicts more recent findings where they were looking at racial and ethnic minority TAs. And they saw, for instance, that underrepresented minority students were less likely to drop courses and were more likely to pass courses when they were assigned to racially or ethnically minoritized TAs. Okay. They also just pulled out, and for the case of point of this study, they just pulled out their Latinx students and Latinx TAs, and they found that the findings were similar. So, based on this, what would be a take-home message for TA professional development? And I think that you're a chatty bunch, and it's okay to just have people maybe you could either say something out loud or you could put it in the chat. And I think maybe we could agree that the take home message is not that we should not have any male instructors as TAs or professors. So let's just start there. That's not the take home message. But what do we do with this information? How might that inform how we could prepare our TAs in, our biology classes? What do you think? Does anybody have ideas? And vocalizing or chatting works. Okay, we've got some chats. Your presence in the class that matters. I mean, I do think that's just an important thing to think about. Like we, just by being there, whoever we are, has a important impact on our students, right? Undergrad students seeing a possible self in their instructors can be tied to identity markers. I mean, you know, this has definitely informed some of the stuff that I have done, kind of modeled after Jeff Shinsky's work with scientist spotlights, and other people have done, kind of similar role model type interventions. That's a great thing. Yeah. Oh my gosh. This whole like representation matters. Or, like, can we say that loud enough over and over again? Understanding what female students are responding to in the context where they're making those gains. What is it about them? I think is it the possible selves or is there something else going on? Stephanie, that is a great point. Like we immediately made a bunch of assumptions about what was going on. But you're right. Like we don't entirely know. But I like this idea of, yeah, fostering a science identity. And there's obviously not going to be, like this one right or one wrong answer. But, when I looked at this and, really wanted to push back against this idea that, we just need to put people in positions and get rid of other people. I thought there's so much we can learn from the role modeling and representation literature. And for me, oh, Haley's saying it better, making relevant examples that reach more than just one student population. And so, yeah, this is where I can really recommend things like the scientist spotlights, or I think it's what is it? The biodiversify examples and data nuggets, have, a lot of diversity incorporated. So I think there's a lot of ways we can do that with our TAs as well, so they can reflect a more diverse type of scientific community. It's not just up to those of us standing in front of the students. So thank you for your input. And I hope you're okay if I tell you another story. So not only does gender matter, but mindset matters. And I know that at least one person when we were chatting mentioned mindset. And I will say this is my BioTAP project. The heavy lifting was done by Sarah Hammerland, who's now in the Department of Biology, Teaching and Learning at the University of Minnesota, in collaboration with Cheryl Scott and also a psychologist, Kevin Binning at Pittsburgh University. But I really liked this study. And so simply, I want to talk a little bit about sense of belonging and just, I feel like, we're all very thoughtful about this. And I realize there's a new thing in the comments about revealing hidden stigmatized identities, and that's great. Thank you, Jane, for that. But I just want to remind you that sense of belonging matters. It's been associated with performance and retention in STEM fields. And we also know that the sense of belonging and mindset, and I'll show a graphic that puts these together, are related, right? Um, the sense of belonging really can sort of dictate almost or predict how you might respond to an academic challenge. And we'll get into that. And if a student thinks their instructor cares about them, they are less likely to leave STEM. So that's great. And these ecological belonging interventions, which is the phrase that really the ecology is the classroom. It's the ecology of the classroom, show promise. So I went to see Kevin Benning speak once at a talk, and it kind of changed my life. And I thought, would this work in our group? And it was right when I was starting BioTAP, and that's this study. So the way we think about this, and this is adapted from the Mindset Scholars Network, but it's basically helping us think about, okay, if you're in a group and you feel already like you're minoritized, or maybe there's some imposterism, or for whatever reason you don't belong. If you get, say, a bad score on an exam, you get this academic challenge, your response might immediately be, I do not belong here. I already suspected it, and now I really think I don't belong it. That could lead to some withdrawal from learning and diminished performance. But if you feel like you belong, then a setback on an exam, for instance, might just lead to, okay, it's normal. This can be hard. I'm going to work. Sustained involvement and higher performance. So you can either have a positive or a negative kind of recursive loop depending upon that belonging. So I find this is a nice way of making that connection between mindset, right? This growth mindset where working can get me to where I want to be versus fixed mindset. I was just born a certain way and that's all there is to it. You know, we so these ecological belonging interventions aim to change classroom ecology, right? These interactions that we're having, the environment that we're learning in, and improve students' sense of belonging. And the one that we adapted from Kevin Binning was designed for students to kind of internalize this idea that challenges they face are normal, temporary, and surmountable. And in these interventions, Kevin Benning has shown that they, for instance, increase scores of racially minoritized students in biology and women in physics. And I just would encourage you to think, and maybe you've already thought along these lines, and it took me a while to figure this out, but I remember, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but I'm going to share it because it makes a connection to what we're studying. I remember being in college and taking calculus, and I was like a good student, and I was getting like C's and D's in my calculus, and I didn't understand it, and I hated it. And I remember saying out loud to other people and myself, well, chicks are just bad at math. And I invoked this total fixed mindset. I withdrew. I didn't work hard. I squeaked by, barely passing, and it was just terrible. And I just wish that I had had this intervention. Okay, so let me explain what we did. I will first say that the course that we were working in was an introductory biology course that tended to have underperformance or an awarding gap between first generation students and their continuing generation counterparts. So students whose parents did not go to college tended to underperform relative to the class mean and relative to students whose parents did go to college. And so this is just one example from the semester before. Okay, so we wondered, could the intervention help those students? Okay. And the intervention that we use is basically just one where ideally week one of the class, ideally the first class, we prompt the students to take some time to reflect on the concerns they might have about taking, in this case, is biology 1009. Doesn't matter. And we thought, what would be difficult or challenging for you? This could be about anything. We don't want to know your name. We just want you to write. Just let it out, right? We'll return to the discussion next week. So we gave them about 10 minutes. And sometimes the students would stand there and they'd like lean back, super chill, because they've got nothing they're worried about. But then after about 5 minutes, they start writing. Like these pages were filled up. So this was great. And then the next week, we shared with them kind of vignettes from former students, which I'm putting in italics because really these were fabricated. Okay. So they were meant to represent what was in what the students said and to kind of pull at themes that might have been present in their concerns. So when I first got here, I was worried because it seemed like there weren't many students like me. We don't specify what that means. That could mean anything, right? It could call any type of imposterism or minority status or whatever. I was really struggling. It felt like everyone else was doing just fine is a key phrase, but I wasn't sure if I was cut out. And then I realized other students were struggling. I started to look at struggling as a positive thing. I talked to other classmates and my TA, and I realized all this effort was worth it because it helped me learn and remember much more. Okay. And there were like 4 of these vignettes that basically got it about the same elements, right? And then the students were asked to like discuss these in groups. They had prompts, right? And then we had them write some responses to these prompts on the board and shared them in plenum. So it was things like, what are the common themes? Why do you think that sometimes students don't realize other people are also struggling? Why and how does your experience change over time? What do people do that helps them improve? And to be honest, I have no doubt that many, if not all the students knew these were fake quotes, right? I have no doubt. And if they had asked us, we would have said these are fake quotes, right? But I don't think they cared, right? Because what we were doing was communicating that we had read and understood many of their concerns because these came out in their written assignments and we wanted to talk about it. And we had the TAs do this. So this is where the BioTAP came in. I was like, I want to do this intervention and I want to do it in a way where we can really test it. And for this one class, we had 16 TAs teaching 32 lab sections. So we had this beautiful design. We went to the TA meeting, the week before where they're talking about like, where do we keep the pipettes and that kind of stuff. And we presented this, study. We spelled out the rules and we had a very sophisticated randomization procedure where they flipped a coin to determine which class they would do the intervention in and which class was kind of business as usual, right? So we did this intervention. We also have followed this up with a lot of other studies about, that actually with Hillary Barron, who's here, about like what this did to the TAs, to read the students' work, et cetera. It was really great. But I want to focus on what happened. And a big fat nothing, right? Multi-level modeling to account for nestedness showed absolutely no main effect of the intervention. Probability, the p-value of 0.5, like this is dart throwing, right? No interaction effects. And first generation student scores did not improve. But wait, why am I talking about this? However, we wondered about the TA characteristics because we had 16 of them And so we were like, what do we want to really dig into? And guess what we really wanted to dig into was TA mindset. Part of that was because Elizabeth Canning had recently come out with a couple of exciting papers, like one of which in 2019 was the STEM faculty who believe ability is fixed have larger racial achievement gaps, right? And inspire less student motivation in their classes overall. So I forget if this was like Science Advances or PNAS, but this was a big paper. A lot of people talked about it, and it was so simple, right? Elizabeth Canning is a genius at these simple but impactful studies because all they did to assess mindset was ask two simple items. So we wondered if our intervention did it vary based on TA mindset. So we asked the TAs the two items that Canning et al. Have asked in many of their studies, right? You agree or disagree on a scale of 0 to 6 with two statements. To be honest, students have a certain amount of intelligence and they really can't do much to change it. Or your intelligence is something about you that you can't change very much. I mean, they're basically saying the same thing, but this works as a very simple construct for approaches to learning. And that was interesting because I want to be honest. These are University of Minnesota students. They've had a lot of active learning. I think it's a pretty growth mindset environment. So it's not like we had any that were answering really fixed, but there was variability. And we binned them based on that variability into the lower growth mindset TAs, which are represented here in gold, and the higher growth mindset TAs that are represented in green, okay, or the right of each of the two pairs, okay? And what we saw was a big difference whereby students with TAs with more fixed mindsets benefited from the intervention. So if your TAs were more fixed, less growth, this intervention that was meant to help you see challenges as normal, temporary, and surmountable benefited you more. And we were like, okay, what is going on? But the more we thought about it, the more we thought it's almost like the intervention is like an inoculation against a fixed mindset learning environment, right? It's sort of countering maybe these subtle and presumably unintentional messages that students get from fixed mindset instructors. You know what I'm saying? And so we thought that was kind of exciting. And so that paper I'm really pleased with, and it's led to a lot of follow-up stuff. So this is one. What would be the take home message for our TAPD? And I realize we need a little time to think about this. And if you want to shout it out, you can. But also, you can just kind of think about it and put it in the chat like last time. Because, it's not an obvious answer, but what do we do with this information?
So, Sohoya, I'm comfortable just unmuting if that's okay with you.
I love it. Yes. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi. There are a couple things on my mind with this. One is a question I'm going to wait for later on, but um, I feel like what's going on here is just opening up the lines of communication. And so if you have a TA that has a fixed mindset, typically the way I think about that is, and I always go back to language, right? Like I've been so influenced by like the Kimberly Tanner work and Colin Harrison's work on that. So, when I think about what type of language those TAs use, or even whether or not students feel comfortable talking to them at all, because if they feel like this person is emanating some sort of attitude that I'm only going to go so far, or I did bad on my first quiz and they're clearly judging me, or they understand that I don't know how to figure out how to set the volume on this micropipette. Whatever it is, I just think that that line of communication, due to the intervention, is going to make a bigger deal in that environment, because it's like, oh, okay, I'm feeling a little, maybe not as comfortable as I would be, but this person must care about me if they're asking me about my concerns. So I think the concern thing, and it's weird because as soon as you said it, like I actually go the opposite way, which makes sense if you know anything about my personality, right? Like I go the way of, like, what are you looking forward to this semester? And what are you going to do to ensure
Ah,
that? So I go that way at the very beginning of the semester. But I do think opening up the lines of communication, especially for students that are first gen, is a huge deal in that type of environment if they feel like their TA is not the most growth mindset-y type person.
I love what you're saying, and I will follow that up actually with we then looked at how TAs responded. So initially we just collected the papers from them, but then the next semester we did this intervention and we had the TAs then read what the students wrote. And what we noticed was that just reading what they wrote and then asking them to reflect on that and how that might inform their teaching, there were so many little threads of empathy. And the thing I hate is that we didn't completely redo the intervention and study it, because my guess is that that impact might have gone away because the TAs reading this might have sort of adopted a more growth mindset, or at least some kind of empathy that wouldn't have communicated a fixed mindset to their students, right? So I have actually, like, I've talked about this intervention with a lot of people, and I've said, you don't have to study it. You don't have to collect data. You don't have to do an experimental control group, etc. But what you can do is you can just have them ask, what are you worried about? Right? And then somehow communicate to the class in an anonymous, non-threatening way that you have read that. You know, like I'm married to like a 65-year-old professor, like a dude. He's got kind of a bit of a flat affect. Like if I were his student, I would never think he cared about students just because he's like a very professory old school kind of dude. And so he now does this in his biogeochemistry classes, and the students love it because he's basically asking them, what are you worried about? And then the next week, he's saying, I read it and I want to respond to some of the general themes. So it's not like an experimental intervention, it's just an intervention that communicates empathy. And then in his response, he's sharing resources. Like, hey, these are my office hours. This is some online resources I found helpful. This is blah, blah, blah. And so, I'm now looking at some of these chats and seeing, yeah, Amy, I think this is a good point that the students, I have found this too. The TAs that we hire are the A and B students. And they don't get that some of our students in our intro bio classes, they just want to pass. Like if they get a C, they're going to be ecstatic, right? And we need to explain that. I think this is a really good point. And then I'm seeing some other content, talk with them about growth versus fixed mindset. Like it really wasn't until like the last 10 years of my life when I'm learning about this and thinking about it that I realized there were plenty of things I said that probably did not communicate a growth mindset to my students. So I think just that revealing of what growth versus fixed mindset is important. Give them this growth fixed mindset training, talk about how they can help students. This is really, this is really good comments. I appreciate this. Rethinking challenging kids. Where there's a skill, there's a way. Oh, this is great. Thank you for that, Logan. Thank you. Awesome. So I think there's a lot of ways we can approach this. There's really good ideas in the chat. And I, in the interest of time, I'm going to move to our third and final case study. And this is more focusing on what teaching assistant professional development matters. Like, what do we do that's most effective? And I suspect that those of you in the room are pushing this envelope way further than this study, but I want to share it anyway because I think it does have some take home messages we can kind of consider. And this is work that was led by Laura Patrick when she was a postdoc with our group, as well as Hilary Barron when she was getting a PhD. And they are both now in great faculty positions and doing great stuff. So the project was called Building Excellence in Scientific Teaching, BEST. Great acronym. I'm sure it's out there in many different forms. And our aim was to create a TAPD program centered on inclusive facilitation of inquiry. So we had all these labs that were doing pure course-based undergraduate research experience exercises, projects, or cure light, right? They were inquiry if they didn't meet the actual definition that we would use of cures. And we wondered what aspects of TAPD are important for fostering TAs to use evidence-based teaching practices. So what do we do that leads to the practices we want? And I was really interested in, because I was fresh off the Scientific Institute, the Summer Institute for Scientific Teaching. Many of you may have engaged in this. They're great experiences, but I was fresh off this and I wondered, they really tell us about the evidence for what we're doing at the Summer Institutes. Does that matter to our TAs? Like, do they need to know the evidence? So Laura Lee, who's super brave, undertook a pretty ambitious project. We had TA training sessions that were loosely modeled on the Summer Institutes. We started first with 38 TAs, a tiny group, right? Of 19 in each group. And these were either A or E. And I will explain what that means. And they participated in a half-day optional workshop. So this is an addition to like kind of the normal training that was provided by the department. And they had already had some experience and were starting their second semester. So what does A versus E mean? So the A group was the activity group. 19 TAs, teams of 4 to 5. We had 4 facilitators, all the authors of this paper. We began with an icebreaker and a jigsaw activity, and the jigsaw activity, they just had like little different figures that they needed to become experts on. And the figures were all centered on the benefits of active learning. Each team was assigned a focal activity to learn about, and then they were to present it to their peers in a mock classroom setting. So they're teaching while using that activity. And then they concluded with minute papers. What about this was useful and might you take to your teaching? The evidence group, a lot of this is similar. 19 TAs, teams of 4 to 5 students, 4 facilitators. Began with an icebreaker and the jigsaw activity. And then the instructors modeled the focal activities and the teams acted as groups of students. Now, and then at the end, we also, each facilitator presented evidence for the effectiveness of their respective technique. So like for after jigsaws, we would say, hey, look at this paper by Dormes et al., where they're talking about jigsaw technique. And we concluded with minute papers. So basically the A group was acting as teachers to model the activity, and they didn't get so much evidence. The E group were acting as students in being exposed to the activity, and they got a lot of evidence. Okay, please do not read all of this, but let me just direct your attention to the far left column. After the jigsaw, the activities they were modeling were like easy assessment techniques. And you've already mentioned Kimberly Tanner in the chat. We were really just drawing from her 21 Strategies paper, which has been one of the most useful papers I've ever read for my own teaching. And so we modeled things like think, pair, share, and multiple hands, multiple voices, etc. We also had a group that focused on games and simulations. We talked about that, and the actual simulation we used is called the Tournament of Kitchen Utensils, where you have different kitchen utensils that have to pick things up, and it's a natural selection simulator. We had a group that was working with a case study that we took from the National Case Study Institute, or the National Center for Case Study Teaching. And then we had another group that was working with sequence strips, and that can be like putting things in order, like the stages of meiosis or steps in DNA synthesis, etc. And what we found, so let's look at this. We're looking at how we asked so many questions. And one of the things we asked them was about their knowledge of active learning. We asked this pre-semester, we asked it post-workshop, and we asked it at the end of the semester. Our sample sizes are not awesome. What we see for each of these pairs is that the bar to the left, or the box and whisker to the left, or in light blue, represents the activity group responses. And then the ones in the dark blue, or to the right of each pair, represent the evidence group responses. And if you look at this, there is a little bit of a difference, but while the TA perceptions of their knowledge of an active learning remained greater at the end for all TAs than at the beginning, the difference between the activity and evidence group, which we see a little bit right after the workshop, disappeared by the end of the semester. So we didn't see a difference. Null results. We're supposed to report those, right? But we also asked them the value of the active learning workshop activities. And the activity group on the left, represented on the left, responded more positively to the value of those activities. Grain of salt, these are small sample sizes, but this was interesting. So the A group TAs who modeled the activities valued the workshop activities more than those who modeled the activities as students. Okay. We also noted when we asked them, how important is the evidence? How is it important for us to present the evidence for the effectiveness of these teaching practices? We reminded them the evidence that they did we reminded them the activities that they did or got the evidence for, right? And we see that most TAs, you can see, are coming in around, well, really between moderately and extremely important. So most TAs, regardless of which section they were in, evidence or no evidence, felt that it was important to present the evidence supporting specific teaching practices. So there's a lot of null results here, except for the fact that everybody thought the evidence was important, even if it didn't seem to translate directly into reported behaviors. We also looked at a lot of videos. We observed a lot of activities. We saw nothing between the A and E group in the behaviors. So your tax dollars at work. Okay, based on this, based on their input, what are the take-home messages for TA professional development? And again, you can say it out loud or you can think about it. And while you're thinking, I can go through some of this, right? There's a little spike in the evidence group for their knowledge, but then it goes down and there's no difference, right? You see this, the activity group valued the activities more than those who were acting as students. And they all thought the evidence mattered. What do we do with that? If we had time, I would throw you into breakout groups. But let's see if anybody has a suggestion. And maybe you can just draw from your own experience. Like, do you invoke the evidence for the practices you're using, right? Like, I see that they want it, but I also see that having the model activities is key. Ooh, we have somebody brave in the chat. Trainee perception of successful training does not match effectiveness of training. Okay. There's probably some importance to this, right? Maybe also we phrased the questions wrong, in a way that wasn't very helpful, but thank you for that. Yeah. I think that matters. I mean, I think that presenting the evidence. They said it mattered. And part of me wonders, and it'd be interesting to know if you agree, part of me wonders if they said that because they were supposed to say it, right? They're being trained as scientists, right? They're studying biology. Like, how can they fill in a bubble that says the evidence doesn't matter, right? I don't know if they can do that given the education we're providing them, you know? Same experience for many students, perception. The evidence has to align with your teaching identity, and sometimes it's in conflict. Okay, Beth, I love that you're saying that because that also brings us back to this growth versus fixed mindset thing, right? Like maybe if we'd showed them some of the data about growth versus fixed mindset, science communication practices would suggest that just showing evidence is not enough to change behaviors. You need to align values, et cetera. This is great. And obviously, having the students participate as teachers in the activities led to a greater value placed on the activities themselves. So that was a clear take home message. Just let them model the activities. So for me, that helped. It helps TAs to move from thinking and just absorbing information by doing what they're learning. Yeah, exactly. So I think I like, Mitra, that you're pointing this out. For me, for Lauralee, for Hillary, Julie, the take home message we took was model, have them do rather than show them how to do it. Right. And so I feel like that is something that we've known for centuries, and maybe we didn't need to do such a convoluted study to get at it. But it was very clear because I was convinced that the evidence was going to change the behavior, and it didn't. Oh, Caleb, that soundtrack is the worst. But thank you. So anyway, that actually is the end. No, it's totally fine, Caleb. Um, we've talked about the take-home messages. This is the agenda that I plan to tackle. And thank you, Beth. You're absolutely right. Sometimes the best studies just show us what we already knew, right? Um, thank you. Thanks to you and Grant for what you just said. Um, so I've asked you these take-home messages, and if anything new came up that you want to share, because I know we have a little bit of time, or if you have any questions, that is great. We'll take an uncomfortable, awkward pause. And while we're taking that awkward pause for you to think and either chat or say something out loud, I will share with you my references. I believe as I was talking, I thought, oh my gosh, there's one of them that's not in here, but I don't remember which one it was. So if anybody wants these are obviously available. I really like all of them. Um, and we are here in Bergen actually following up some of that TA mindset work in our introductory math curriculum because we have some strong math challenges here. And suspect there may be some kind of fixed mindset vibe that is going on with maybe some of our TAs and tutors. And so I'm taking a lot of this stuff, and Elizabeth Canning is going to be over here. And by here, I mean in Europe. So we're going to take advantage of that when she's on a Fulbright and do some, hopefully, collaboration. And now that we've had our awkward pause, I'm seeing gives us something to cite, Jane. No citation is bad. You're even allowed to say, in this Patrick et al. Stupid study, because at least it's a citation, right? Okay. Oh my gosh, one of my favorite papers. Thank you so much, Andrea. Yes, I love this paper. Um, yeah, and it has led to a lot of follow-up. Like I said, actually, Hillary Barron, who I think is here, just contacted me last week about a paper we're resuscitating on, kind of what TAs need. And then we have another one on the how the intervention itself impacted TA empathy. And yes, thank you so much. If there's not more questions, or if there's not questions or chat, I'm totally happy to let Caleb take over. Oh, Stephanie, please.
I'm sorry, I talk too much, so like I really try to stay quiet for a while.
Do not apologize. Never apologize for talking.
So, I actually was curious about the first story you told us with respect to gender. Um, because I think about this too. I hear students talk a lot about the intimidation factor with faculty, and sometimes I do wonder, particularly for students that identify as women, or really not men, if you will, if there sometimes is a little bit more hesitancy to go to something like office hours, no matter what you call them. So,
Yeah.
I don't know if you could speak to that. Like, I don't know if anyone has ever looked at, um, the differences. Like, one thing I was thinking about in terms of perception, because it is a perception, right? It's sort of
Oh,
like,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's a perception of this person is, maybe scarier or more judgmental or whatever, depending on how they project themselves in a classroom. And we do know that there are gender differences in terms of perception, in the
Mhm.
way students see, again, on the binary, regardless of that not really being up to date. But that being said, one thing I was thinking about was assessment strategies. And I don't know if you or anyone on the call knows. Do you? You look really excited about this. Because I mean, I think about the stuff that I do, and I give them so many chances on things, or whether it's rolling out an extra credit, or whether it's you can drop your lowest quiz grade. And so I just wonder if there are some differences that might translate to whether or not students feel more included and or like an instructor is more approachable from that perspective.
Oh my gosh. First stop, assessment is an equity issue, right? The way we assess our students is an equity issue. And the traditional format, and let me tell you, I'm working out here. I don't need to whisper because none of my colleagues are actually in my house. I don't know why I was like, let me tell you, out here in Norway, and I love it and I love my job, but the majority of courses are graded 100% on one 5 hour exam that you take after 15 weeks of instruction. And it is an equity issue. And so we've worked, it's not just me, but other people have documented that in terms of gender, possibly generation in college, that those high stakes tests, for instance, invoke test anxiety and disproportionately disadvantage women, possibly first generation students. The picture is more clouded when we're talking about racial and ethnic groups, but that's also because we tend to bin them all into one group as though they have the same shared experience. But I think this idea of having, for instance, you're talking about you can drop a grade. You don't need to, like, there doesn't have to be, I forget if it was you or if I was just thinking in my head, said, like the no excuses, no questions asked kind of thing. Did you say that? Yeah.
I didn't technically say it that way, but sure.
Okay.
That's
Okay,
okay.
let's go with that. Let's go with
I'll
it.
go with
Because
it.
it communicates to students.
Mm.
Yeah. Oh, I know, Jane. I know. Don't even get me started on this. Like this assessment thing. It's the hill I'm going to die on in Norway, let me tell you. But we communicate like some empathy, we communicate some flexibility, we communicate, we understand that students have lives outside of the 2 or 3 hours a week that they're spending with us. It is huge. Like I'm now the parent of college students, and I see this playing out in how they are navigating higher ed. And so we really know, and you guys are putting all kinds of great stuff in this. And I've got to grab this paper from Beth to see as well before it goes away. Oh, yeah, I love this. Um, I have that one in my stash. That's very good. And it is like everything. So there's also a really good review paper about high stakes testing, and it does talk about these multiple dimensions that are problematized, including equity. It came out, I think, this year of the review. But so I 100% agree with you. And the problem as far as TAPD goes is that our TAs don't have control over this. And I'm speaking blanket, like maybe in your class they have more, but typically there's a specific way we assess, and the TAs toe the line and they implement those assessments. So it comes a little bit more down to us. But I think where the TAs can have a role is communicating a growth mindset, communicating empathy, communicating approachability. And you're absolutely right, Stephanie, that there is plenty of literature on the fact that women are perceived as more approachable. I mean, dumber and not as funny as men, but more approachable. So, we kind of have to balance this out. But so I think there's a lot going on there that we have to be intentional to circumvent because it's not going to happen accidentally, right? The gender of the faculty instructor definitely made a difference. And we've seen that. I've done a lot of work also with Sissy Ballin, and I'm pointing downstairs, on classroom participation, where we've shown, like these massive and these are studies that surprise nobody, right? These massive participation differences in classroom environments. We've replicated those studies in Norway, which tends to be like around number one, two, or three in the gender gap index, like in terms of being a woman. This is like the best place in the universe to have a uterus. But we still see massive participation differences and women being less likely to interact with male professors. And so, just as a disclaimer, I would like to point out that I love men. I am married to one, I'm the mother of one. I have three boy cats. So, this isn't a male bashing thing, it's a societal thing that we need to work together to address. And I think the end of this very long, enthusiastic response to you, Stephanie, is that it has to be intentional. We can't just have we can't have good intentions. We have to intentionally do things like these interventions or communicating a growth mindset somehow, etc. It just has to be thoughtful. And there's great stuff in this. TAs can also serve as amplifiers by clarifying for students when the students have misconnections. Yeah, this is really good. They can be amplifiers, they can be communicators with the instructors. So I love what you've said, but I also feel like I'm probably bucking up against the time, Caleb. Should I say thanks for the time? And everything's available if you want it. And I really have appreciated the chance to come back and to BioTAP. I had a great time. I'm really grateful to those of you who led it. It's good to see folks from the cohort. And I'm really excited about what you have planned for the next 2 days. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Zahoya. And if I don't know if folks want to unmute and clap if you really want to do that, or use your emojis since we're not in an actual
The
room.
emojis are great. Thank you. I actually love
Awesome.
that Grant Sephora. I mean, yeah, we all know what that is.
Thank you again, Zahoya. This was a really wonderful talk. So everyone that's on the call, we just have a few minutes, so we'll be restarting at 2:20 for our leadership update and community hour. So you're welcome to just hang out, go on a break, but we'll just be reconvening in just a few minutes.